From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I can say without exception or equivocation that the United States will not torture.
When President Obama signed executive orders to end torture and shut down Guantanamo, did he leave open the controversial policy of rendition, White House for kidnapping, the practice of abducting suspects anywhere in the world and secretly transferring them to another country? Today, a debate between allies, attorney Michael Ratner of the Center for Constitutional Rights and attorney Scott Horton of Harper's Magazine. Then, remember Tim DeChristopher?
Once I started buying up every parcel, they understood pretty clearly what was going on. And so at that point, they stopped the auction, and some federal agents came in and took me out.
Tim DeChristopher is the University of Utah grad student who disrupted a government auction of 150,000 acres of wilderness by bidding on thousands of acres in an attempt to save the property from drilling. Well, now Interior Secretary Ken Salazar has canceled the leases to drill. And as the Senate continues debate on the stimulus plan, we'll host a debate on a controversial provision in the bill that could lead to the construction of a new generation of nuclear power plants. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. New figures show Afghan civilian casualties rose to more than 2,100 last year. More than a third were killed by Afghan and U.S.-led troops. On Tuesday, Afghan President Hamid Karzai renewed criticism of deadly U.S. attacks.
از 2006 به این طرف تشنج بین ما دیگه واقعیت جا شد.
Our demands are clear. House searches of Afghans, arrests of Afghan civilians, and civilian casualties must cease. And U.S. and NATO countries are naturally putting on pressure to make us silent and retract from this claim. This is not possible.
The U.S. has ignored growing criticism from Karzai, including his demand for a timetable for the withdrawal of all foreign troops. President Obama is preparing to send around 17,000 additional troops to Afghanistan later this year. Militant attacks also increased by one-third in Afghanistan last year. Defense Minister Abdulrahim Wardak said the number of foreign militants has swelled because of the Iraq War.
Since last year, as the result of the success in the surge in Iraq, there has been a flow of foreign terrorists into Afghanistan. There has been engagement this year, in 2008, that in some of these engagements, actually 60% of the total force which we have encountered were foreign fighters.
Al Jazeera is reporting Israeli forces have fired on a Lebanese aid ship off the coast of Gaza. Witnesses say Israeli troops then stormed the boat, beat passengers, and destroyed communication equipment. The boat's carrying more than 60 tons of desperately needed aid for Gaza. Israel's forcibly denied several aid ships trying to break its blockade of Gaza, almost forcing one to sink last month. The UN's humanitarian agency in Gaza is coming under threat from a new congressional measure in the United States. 8 Congress members have co-sponsored House Congressional Resolution 29, which threatens to pull funding for the United Nations Relief Works Agency, or UNRWA. The bill says UNRWA's links to terror groups. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza rely on UNRWA for survival. Israel attacked several UNRWA facilities, including schools and aid depots, during its 3-week assault on Gaza. On Wednesday, UNRWA spokesperson Christopher Gunness renewed calls for an independent probe of an Israeli attack on one of the schools.
The Israeli army at first said there were militants inside our installations. They later had to retract that. And at the same time, the IDF and other Israeli spokespeople were saying that there were militants inside our installations. Israeli officials in our coordination meetings were saying they knew very well that there weren't. So there's been a flipping and a flopping, and with each flip and with each flop, the credibility of these Israeli spokespeople is hanging in rags. That's why we say there has to be an impartial investigation to find out what really happened.
In Sri Lanka, the last functioning hospital in the northern war zone has closed after coming under its 5th attack in 3 days. Medics and patients have evacuated the area. Thousands of civilians continue to be trapped and without medical care as Sri Lanka's government forces battle Tamil Tiger rebels. The hospital reportedly came under fire from cluster bombs. The UN says at least 50 civilians have been killed over the past few days. In Somalia, the director of a local radio station has been assassinated. Saeed Talil Ahmed was killed by gunmen on Wednesday in Mogadishu. Ahmed headed the independent radio station Horn Afrique. He's believed to be the 9th local journalist killed in Somalia since 2007. President Obama's unveiled a plan that would cap executive pay and end bonuses at firms receiving future taxpayer bailouts. An executive at a bailed-out company could make a maximum $500,000.
For top executives to award themselves these kinds of compensation packages in the midst of this economic crisis isn't just bad taste, it's bad strategy, and I will not tolerate it as president. We're going to be demanding some restraint in exchange for federal aid, so that when firms seek new federal dollars, we won't find them up to the same old tricks.
The caps would only apply to future bailouts, not the money already dispersed. The move follows outcry over last week's disclosure. Wall Street firms paid out more than $18 billion in bonuses last year. Meanwhile, new reports found that firms aided by the $700 billion Wall Street bailout spent more than $114 million on lobbying and political contributions for the 2008 election. The Center for Responsive Politics says the lobbying yielded a return of more than $295 billion through government spending and favorable legislation, a return of more than 250%. Meanwhile, American auto parts suppliers are asking for more than $20 billion in government bailouts. The Automatic News reports supplies have requested half the money to come in Treasury Department loans and the rest to come through payments from automakers. The electronics giant Panasonic has announced plans to lay off 15,000 workers. The Japan-based company will close 27 plants worldwide following its first annual loss in 6 years. A British high court is claiming U.S. government threats have prevented it from revealing details on the alleged torture of a Guantanamo prisoner. On Wednesday, 2 senior judges said they're unable to release key information because the U.S. has threatened to end intelligence sharing with Britain. The British Attorney General is considering whether to bring charges against Americans involved in the rendition and alleged torture of British resident Binyam Mohammed. Mohammed claims his confession to terrorism charges was given only after he had his penis sliced by a blade. The Bush administration's refused to release key documents to Mohammed's lawyers and said efforts to obtain them would cause serious and lasting damage to U.S.-British relations and jeopardize British national security. In its new ruling, the British High Court said it reluctantly caved to U.S. threats because disobeying them would mean putting the British public at risk. Mohammed's attorney, Clive Stafford Smith, said, quote, "For the British Foreign Secretary to give in to these illegal demands by the Bush administration is capitulation to blackmail, pure and simple." Interior Secretary Ken Salazar has canceled a controversial last-minute Bush administration attempt to auction off nearly 150,000 acres of wilderness in southern Utah. On Wednesday, Salazar said he had canceled the leases to drill for gas and oil on the 77 parcels of public land. The sale was initially delayed after University of Utah student Tim DeChristopher posed as a bidder and bought up thousands of acres. We'll speak with DeChristopher later in the broadcast. An American war resister has been arrested after being ordered to leave Canada. Cliff Correll is being held at a Washington state jail after surrendering at the U.S.-Canada border. Cornell's attorney is criticizing the arrest because Cornell had announced he intended to return to his unit voluntarily. He's being held on charges of going AWOL. Cornell fled to Canada 4 years ago after his Army unit was ordered to go to Iraq. And Congress has voted to delay the transition from analog to digital broadcasts until June. Broadcasters were supposed to turn off their analog signals later this month, but the Obama administration asked for a delay amidst ongoing consumer confusion over how to make the switch. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.